Well, what do you do on a day like this when it's raining? I guess we'll do some reloading. I loaded my tumbler with a bunch of 223 brass, and I also loaded it with the 530-06s that I found out at the range. So they've been tumbling for a couple hours, and hopefully it's been long enough to give them a little time to be clean enough to load. So I gotta dig through here, find all 5 of them. There they are, looks like. So there's the 5 pieces that I brought from the range. Looks like they're fairly clean, straight out of the tumbler. They actually look pretty nice. Welcome back to my reloading bench. It was raining outside, so I thought it would be a good time for me to come in and shoot a reloading video. First thing is first, safety. Make sure you have a good clear pair of glasses to keep things out of your eyes. Put them on and make sure you check them that they don't have a bunch of scratches and that they're not dirty and obstructing your view. It's very important that you keep things out of your eyes. Some of the items that you have to be able to reload is a press. You have to have some brass, some dies, primers, powder. You have to have some lube so you can lube your cases, some sort of tool to put the primers in to the brass, bullets, and some information. You also have to have a scale, and you'll notice that I have a scoop that I'm going to be using to touch the powder. I never use my fingers to touch the powder because my fingers have oils in them that can actually harm the powder. So the scoop goes from the powder to the bowl, and the bowl goes from the scale to the funnel. You have a deburring tool, some trimmers, a case mouth brush, and this little set of pliers is not very, I don't use them that often. I only use them when I have a case that has problems as far as maybe dents or something in it. Now, the information that I said a minute ago, there's several places where you can get your load data. One place would be whatever powder you're going to be using. A lot of times you can find the website, and in this case, in IMR's case, they do have on their site some very good load data. Another place to look is the Lee manual, but what I prefer is the Lyman 49th edition manual. I like that book. When I compare the two against each other, I noticed that the Lee book has much more conservative loads than the Lyman does. The Lyman lets you load things a little hotter, like on their max settings, than what Lee would. I want to tell you that I'm by no means a reloading expert. Now, yes, I have a lot of experience in this department, but I'm just sharing information that works for me off of research that I've done, and I want you to take this information at your own risk. You should always be careful about any information that you find on the web, you know, as far as YouTube videos and stuff like that. Be careful. Do your own load data. Check your own sources and make sure that the data that you're getting, whether it's from me or anybody, make sure that that data is good data before you use it. And again, like I said, go to their website or check out those books. Now, your dies are going to have a shell holder. Or excuse me, your cases are going to have a shell holder, because the shell holder is what holds the case in your press, which will shove it up into your dies. From this point of view, those two shell holders down there, they look the same, but they're actually way, way different. Now, the one on the left that I'm pointing to is the type of shell holder that you'll need for your press, because on your press, if I raise the ram a little bit, you'll notice, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to get wobbly there, you'll notice that there's a little groove in the ram of the press, and that groove is going to correspond with this groove, and I'll push with my thumb, and that's how you insert your shell holder into your ram of your press. If you try to use the wrong one, the Lee ones that are for the auto prime tool, they'll sit up there, but they don't fit. They don't have that groove. So when you're buying equipment, make sure that you buy the correct shell holders, the ones with the notch on the bottom. They'll fit in your press. And that's a universal thing. Every single stage press that I've ever seen, they use this shell holder. So I hope you enjoy this information. And again, I'm going to be talking about these 5 cases. These are 30-06 cases, and that's what this video is going to be focused on today. However, whether you're a lover of this 30-06, or if you happen to be a person who loves the 270 Winchester round, in either case, I think this video would be very beneficial to you. And the reason I say that is because the 30-06 round and the 270 Winchester round are almost identical in many, many ways. The brass, in fact, looks the same. The differences that you'll find, though, is the mouth of the cases and what size diameter bullet they shoot. In our case, the 30-06, we shoot a bullet that is .308 in diameter, which we refer to as a 30 caliber. And in the 270 round, it's .277, or sometimes they refer to it as 27, or thus the name 270. Another difference that you'll notice between our 30-06 round and the 270 round would be the trim lengths. And what I mean by that is from the tip of the brass here to the bottom of the brass, the length that they allow you to trim. The 270 brass, for the most part, the trim lengths are a little bit longer. In other words, the brass is a little bit longer than what the 30-06 brass is. Our trim lengths are just a hair shorter. Now when you look at the brass, and say I have the brass and I put a bullet in it. Sorry about my artwork, I know it sucks. But say you have a bullet and you measure from the bottom of the brass, well, to the tip. This measurement on the 30-06 and the 270, this measurement is exactly the same. So even though we have a different diameter bullet, and even though the trim length of the brass is different, the overall length of the two is the same. So I hope you enjoyed this video, whether you're a 30-06 guy or a 270 guy, because I have a lot of good information I'm fixing to share. Okay, I'm sitting here looking at my Lyman 49th edition manual, and what I want to do is I want to flip over to the 30-06 page, and I want to share some load data with you. The trim length for the 30-06 Springfield, which is from the edge of the case all the way to the bottom, is 2.49 inches. That's what these cases should be trimmed at. The overall length is 3.34 inches. We're going to need a large rifle primer, which we already have. And now I'm going to move over to the 165 grain portion of the manual for this round, and I'm going to talk a little bit. Now remember, the overall length when you're using a heavier bullet changes to 3.285. In the book here, it gives you starting suggested loads and it gives you max loads. Some of these loads you'll notice are in bold, such as the IMR 4064 is in bold. And if you come up here, you notice the 52 max load, 52 grains of powder of IMR 4064, that's also in bold. So what that's telling us is that the loads in bold designate potentially the most accurate load. So that's the load that we're going to produce today. So with all of that data that I've gotten out of my book, I've wrote down on this paper, because every time I do any kind of loading, I always write down on a paper what those loads are, exactly what they were. For example, today, 30-06 Springfield, the primers that we used was CCI large rifle primers, number 200. This was the bullet, 165 grain spear, ballistic tip, soft point. 2034 was the part number on their thing. The powder, IMR 4064, and it said we could go between 47 grains and 52 grains, and I circled the 52 because that's what we put in these bullets. The trim length of the cases was 2.49 inches, and the overall length of the bullet is supposed to be 3.34 inches, but if you use the 165 grain bullet, it lowers it to 3.285 inches. Your velocity is approximately 2,851 feet per second, and that's at 52 grains of powder. And the brass has been trimmed. So whenever I load, I always put one of these cards with the bullets that I load. For example, these 223s that I made. I pull out my paper, tells me everything. Tells me what date I made it, what it was, what primers, what powders in them, what the trim was, what if they've been swedged, trimmed, whatever. But that's what I'm gonna recommend that you do, is make yourself a paper showing everything about that load. Now I'd like to take a little bit of time and I'd like to talk to you about lubrication of these cases. Before I put these cases into the decapping and resizing die, it's very important that I lube them. There's several ways of doing that. One of them is using this unique case lube made by Hornady. It's very good stuff. So you open it. It reminds me a lot like chapstick or something. You just take and get a little dab of that on your finger. Take a case and just wipe it down on there. Roll the case around. Get a little bit of lube everywhere on there. If you got a little bit excess on your fingers, just kind of put it into the mouth of the case. This will help the case when you start that expansion, the expander ball. So that's one option of lubing cases. There's another way, and that's where people could buy a little grease pad. I don't have mine anymore. I used to do it, but it's a little foam pad, and basically you take a little it's like oil, and you pour this little bit of oil. It's a clear colored oil, and you pour it out on this lube pad, and then you lay your cases down on it and you roll them like this, and then they get that oil on them. That works pretty good too. But what I like to do is take a piece of paper, or in this case like a little dryer sheet, and I lay it down, and I'll set my cases down and I'll use some Dillon case lube, DCL they call it. It's really good stuff. This stuff was made with two components. It has lanolin and alcohol. It's really good stuff. The lanolin is propelled through the alcohol. So what happens, I shake it up a little bit, I give it a couple squirts, roll them a little bit, and I'm done. So the cases will sit there for a few minutes, and the alcohol will evaporate. It's actually isopropyl alcohol. It'll evaporate, and then after maybe 5 minutes or so, all that's left behind on the cases is the lanolin. And as you know, lanolin is pretty good for your skin. That's one of the key components in a lot of bar soaps that you would use. So those are the steps that I recommend for my case lube. I recommend the Dillon case lube. I've had a lot of luck with it. It works great for me. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the dies. Today we're going to be using RCBS 30-06 full length dies. In this case there's two dies. The first die is the decapping and resizing die, and the second die is the bullet seating die. Now what I've done for the video is I've taken both of these dies apart so I can show you all the parts and what the dies do, what they look like. So starting with the decapping die, you have your first part, which is what we call the die body. Okay, this is the decapping die body. The second piece is the decapping rod die bushing. Third piece, the complete decapping rod assembly, but it can be taken apart into three separate pieces, which includes the first piece is the decapping pin. This is the actual part that comes down and knocks the primer out of your piece of brass. The second part would be the decapping pin holder with the expansion ball on it. I'll explain that in the decapping process. And the third part is the actual decapping rod itself. It's threaded all the way down. You can put a flathead screwdriver on one end and the other end is threaded, because what happens is the decapping pin holder houses the decapping pin. You notice that? It goes in like that. Then the decapping rod threads into that. Then you have your complete assembly. You have two more pieces. You have a little lock nut and the die lock ring, which this holds the die in the correct position onto the press. This is what you lock. So now reassembly. I'm going to take the decapping rod assembly and I'm going to thread it into the die bushing. Now the little lock ring, or excuse me, lock nut is going to come down onto that as well. Now all of this is going to go into the die body and it's going to thread down. Now this piece, this bushing that I'm threading, can go ahead and lock, and what I want to do is I want to make sure that at the bottom of the die that I have about 1/4 of an inch of decapping pin coming out of the bottom, and if I do, I'll hold this and I'll lock this little nut. Last but not least, I'm going to take the die lock ring and thread it all the way to the top. This die is now complete, and as a unit it's known as the decapping die. The second die is a little simpler. This is the bullet seating die, and again it starts with a die body, totally different type of die body. It also has a die lock ring, the exact same one that the other die had, and also the exact same lock nut that the other die had. What this one has that's different is it has a bullet seating stem. Now this is the part that comes in contact with the top of the bullet when we're at the step of bullet seating. Now I'm reaching over here to grab a bullet to show you. So the bullet's here, this part comes in contact with the bullet and pushes it down into the shell. Now reassembly of this one is a little bit more cumbersome. I like to have a long small screwdriver, and what I'll do is I'll take the die body and I'll drop the bullet seating stem inside. From here I'm going to put my screwdriver down inside and flip it upright. Now I'm going to take a second screwdriver and I'm going to start threading in a counterclockwise motion until I get the bullet seating stem threads started. From here I continue my counterclockwise motion until I get the bullet seating stem all the way to the top. If you don't use this technique with this second screwdriver underneath, you'll have a very difficult time starting this threading into the die body. From here, and you notice I have the bullet seating stem all the way up. From here I take my little lock ring, or excuse me, lock nut, and just get it started a little bit. Nothing crazy. And then last but not least, I start my die lock ring all the way up. So again, in closing, I have two dies. I have my decapping die, now that you know what everything looks like inside, and I have my bullet seating die. Now that these cases have sat for a few minutes and they've had time to dry, I'm going to install the shell holder into the press and also the decapping and resizing die. One thing that I forgot to mention when it comes to case lube is if you take too much lube, like the first one I used that wax, this is the one that I used that wax on. If you put too much or too thick of wax and you run this case through the sizing die, the decapping and sizing die, and there's too much lube, whether it's the grease pad or this wax, sometimes you'll get ripples in the shoulder area of your case here. Now where my thumb is, this is what we refer to as the case mouth. This would be the neck. This bulging area right here is the shoulder. So in this area, if you get any kind of rippling or anything, you might want to lower the amount of lube that you're putting on those cases. I've actually done that in the past. So like I said, you'll get little ripples here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and install our decapping die. Again, the decapping die, you can recognize it as a decapper because of the pin sticking out of the bottom. This lets you know that you have the decapping die. So to install it, I'm going to raise the ram all the way up, and I'm going to put the die in and start threading it into the press. I want to thread the die down until the die body comes in contact with the shell holder here. Once it touches the shell holder, I'm going to lower the ram and go in, or should I say down, clockwise about another between 1/8 and 1/4 of a turn. Then I'll raise the ram and I'll put pressure on the die so that it can't turn, not easily anyway, so that I can lock the lock ring. Now as I lock the lock ring, I don't want the die moving in or out. From here, I find my channel locks or your wrench and just give it a little snug. It does not have to be gorilla tight. At this point, we're ready to decap the cases. So I insert the case in into the shell holder, and I'm going to raise the ram all the way. I want this shell holder to come in contact with the die body. As you come lower the brass, you'll feel this little catch. This little catch is perfectly normal, because what's happening is that's the expander ball that I showed you earlier, expanding the case mouth to the correct diameter to accept the bullet. Okay, so we've done a full length resize, we've knocked the old primer out, and we've sized the mouth of the case. So that's what it looks like. Primer's been knocked out, the case has been resized, and the mouth of the case is good. Now the whole time you're doing anything with these cases, you want to make sure that you're constantly inspecting them for cracks, anything. You're looking for any kind of tears or anything like that. It's very important. This press that I'm using is a very good press. I've used it for a lot of different calibers, a lot of different sizes of bullets, and my personal opinion, I think 30-06 is probably about its limit, and it handles it just fine. I think anything bigger, might be having a little trouble. But you notice I'm cleaning them as I go. Cleaning them, I'm inspecting them, I'm just kind of checking everything. Because the whole reloading process is about inspecting those cases, to me anyway. Sometimes if you get bound up, you got to start over. And that's, like I said, that's because that expansion ball on the decapping pin, decapping rod I should say, is resizing the case mouth, which is totally normal. If I was thinking ahead a little bit more, I would have put a little bit more lube on one of the case mouths, probably the first one. Therefore I wouldn't have to worry so much about how hard it was on the press. Okay, so now that I have these done, my next step is to trim them, get them to the correct length. Okay, I'm all finished decapping and resizing. The next thing I like to do is I like to take the primer pockets and I like to run a screwdriver through them and try to get the carbon out of them. Sometimes you'll get carbon buildup in there. It's a good idea to remove it. If you don't remove the carbon buildup, you could have problem seating the primers as deep as you'd like to seat them. And we don't want our primers to seat not deep enough, because if that happens we could have problems with what they call slam fires. And what a slam fire is, in general terms, is when any kind of unnecessary, or should I say unexpected, discharge of the firearm. If these were being shot through a semi-automatic military style rifle and I had a primer bulging out, that could definitely give me problems with slam fires. I'll explain a little bit more about that when I prime these cases. So I've got all 5 of the primer pockets clean. You could actually probably honestly skip that step, but I like to do it, make sure it gets done. So this little shell holder chucks into my drill. I insert the case into there, and I'll use this cutter to trim my cases. I push this inside until the little tip here touches the shell holder. It'll bottom out. When it bottoms out, there's no more trimming. That's as much as you can go. The drill sure makes it nice. You can also use a regular lathe style trimmer like my Lyman Universal back here. You can also use that. But since I'm only doing 5 cases, and you see that wobble? Anytime you get a wobble like that, it's probably because the case isn't centered correctly. So you got to go through and make sure that you get it centered a little better. I'm still off a little bit. But the Lyman Universal is a great trimmer. These trimmers are made by Lee, and they're very inexpensive, and they work pretty good. Yeah, I'm a little off center, but I'm going to go ahead and trim it anyway. If you're off center and you happen to be wobbling a little bit, it's not going to hurt your trim length at all. Now, the paper that I wrote down all of our information on, here in a minute I'm going to check the trim length and see if I'm anywhere close. If I'm a little bit under the trim length, that's okay, as long as I'm not over it. So that concludes the trimming step. Now, let's see. Trim length for these cases, 2.494. So let's see how we're doing. 2.494. Let me get my calipers. 2.494. These calipers are very nice to have. 2.494 or under. 2.487. So we're good. 2.4865. 2.486. Very consistent. 2.489. So we're just under 2.49, so that's good. 2.4875. So that's good. The trimming looks good. At this point, got a couple little minor steps to do before we're actually totally finished trimming. One of them is deburring. I want to deburr these cases because the mouths of the cases, they get like a little burr on them, especially if you take a lot of brass off. So I'm going to use this little deburring tool to clear any catches that these cases may have. When you flip this tool around and you go to the inside, don't take a lot of material out. Just take a little bit out. That looks good. Another thing I forgot to mention, and let me reach over here and find another case. When you trim your brass, you'll notice very quickly which ones have been trimmed versus one that has not been trimmed, because they'll shine. So let me go ahead and deburr this one as well. You just want to take enough off until it's nice and smooth. Don't take too much out of the inside of it, like I said. 2, 3 more. Now that one you can definitely feel the burrs. I don't know if you can see it. I can definitely feel it though. This deburring tool does a really good job. When you go inside the case mouth and you do a little bevel like this, that helps the bullets seat a little better. Trying to show you to see if you can see the burrs. So those bullets, they seat really well. Today, however, we're not using flat bottom bullets. We're using Boattail bullets. They call them that because they're the shape of like a boat. And they tend to seat a little bit better than a flat bottom boat. A flat bottom bullet, I meant to say. So just a little bit of deburring. From here, we're We're going to take our case mouth brush. We're just cleaning out the case mouths because we want these nice and clean so that we can add powder and seat them bullets. If there's one thing that I recommend that you do when it comes to reloading, it's keep everything clean. Your equipment, keep everything in good working order. Take good care of it. Put it away when you're done. Don't just leave it all hanging out. You know, take a good look at everything and make sure everything's taken well care of. So again, the case mouth brush is just to get any debris that may have been in there. You know, tumbling media, dirt, anything like that. So this concludes the trimming step. Okay, I'm back and I'm ready to prime these cases. I've just trimmed them, I've decapped, resized, they came out of the tumbler, they're clean. The next step, which I'm going to show you right now, is the priming of them. We're going to use the CCI large rifle primers, number 200. I have 5 cases here, so I'm going to need 5 primers. I just pull them off. This is a pack of 100. I'm just going to get 5. So I'm going to be using the Lee Auto Prime tool. It's a great tool. So I'm going to find 5 primers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Set them over there and I'm going to dump them in. Now they naturally oriented correctly. Let me flip them over and make them backwards and show you something. This little tray has grooves in it. These grooves are so that when you shake the primers in there, it'll help them to orient the correct way. See, now they're all oriented correctly? That's what these grooves are for. So it's got a built-in flip tray in it. Works really well. Put the cover on. Now I'm going to take my 5 cases and I'm going to insert primers into them. It's important that the case mouth is not pointed up toward yourself or over toward somebody. You want to point the case mouth somewhere in a safe direction where it's not going to have any problems if one of these ignites and goes off. When you seat the primer, you want to make sure that you seat the primer below the height of the case. You want them countersunk just a little bit below this portion here. As I explained a little bit earlier, was the purpose, the reason that we want these primers to be seated a little bit below is what I was referring to as slam firing. And like I said earlier, on a semi-automatic rifle that has a floating firing pin, as they put it, meaning that the firing pin does not have a spring to hold it into place. If you have a primer, I'll try to do it on this one and see if I can do it. Let me take this apart and see if I was able to do it. Try to give you an example here. Okay, it won't let me remove the shell holder, but you see how that primer in there is not seated all the way? Now it would go a little bit further in, you know, because I'd have to get it out of this tool, but what I'm trying to say is if you had a firearm that had a floating firing pin and your primer wasn't seated all the way, you could have problems. When that bolt of that weapon comes back and it picks up a bullet off the magazine, it shoves it into the chamber. If this primer is sticking out, the bolt face, which is a little notch on the end of the bolt, generally slams against the brass itself, okay? And there's a little place in the bolt face that is, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of recessed away from the primer. But if you have a primer that's bulging out a little bit, maybe you had a loose primer pocket, or I don't know what happened, but you have a primer that's not seated correctly, when that bolt comes forward, even though you're hitting the case itself, that firing pin does have a little bit of play. And if you have that primer sticking out just, I mean, a thousandth, that primer, excuse me, that firing pin could hit that primer, and you could have premature ignition of that round, unexpected ignition. It'll scare the hell out of you. And one of the common firearms that I know of that has that problem is the SKSs. They're a very cheap, inexpensive rifle. They shoot great. I have a couple of them. They're good guns, but they do have a problem because they have that floating pin. So you want to make sure that these primers are all the way in. A bolt action rifle, on the other hand, you shouldn't have this problem because you're doing everything manually. But I just wanted to make sure you understood about that. That slam fire is a real deal. When it happens, sometimes it'll happen and it'll unload the whole magazine before it stops. Other times it'll go until it malfunctions. But in either case, it's very dangerous. So to avoid any kind of mishap with that, you should be following your gun safety rules and have very good muzzle discipline, knowing where your barrel's pointed at all times. You don't want to walk around with your barrel, pointed at somebody, especially if that thing slam fires. You just killed somebody. So there are reasons why there's safety rules in firearms and guns and things like that. So slam fires, yeah, it's a real thing, and you got to be real careful about it. So anyway, I'll see you on the next step. We're going to be powdering next. Hope you're enjoying the video. Alright, now it's time to powder these cases. First thing I want to talk about is the scale. Whatever you have sitting on the scale at the time that you turn it on, the scale will calibrate, meaning it'll zero to that item. Okay, so this brass here weighs approximately 201 grains. So if I put, these brass, I don't know if they weigh the same thing or not. See, there's 0.5 of a difference. So, like I said, whatever's sitting on it, that's what it's going to zero to. Okay, 267 grains. So what we want to do in loading our 30-06s is we want to zero our our scale to our bowl. We'll let it sit there for a few. I'm going to take some powder and I'm going to pour powder into this bowl, because I don't like directly getting into my powder. So we're here. We're just going to pour enough for 5 bullets. At no point do I try to come in contact with the powder. And I always set it away from me. Now, let's have a quick refresh. We're going to load our bullets at 52 grains of powder. IMR 4064. So let's get started. 1, 2, 3. Maybe this one will do it. 53.4. So we're going to come down to 52. Now, let me say something real quick. Let me get this dialed in real quick. 52. Sometimes when I want the scale to register again, I'll lift it up and it'll measure it again. There's another thing I want to tell you. In reference to our load, if we were looking in our book and it says between 47 and 52 grains, if this target weight right here was not 52, if it was 47 grains, we could be a lot more easygoing about the amount of how close we got to be. In other words, 47.2 would have been okay, 47.4 would have been okay. We wouldn't have had to be so close. But since we're on the high end of the spectrum, we have to be right on the money. We can't afford any mistakes as far as our powder. 52.0. Now we know that that charge weighs 52 grains. Turn the scale off. Let's zero our brass. And we'll put that load in that brass and then we'll weigh it. See what happens. If you pour the powder fast, it'll get balled up there. Then you'll have to tap it and everything else to get it to go in. 52.0. So that's a good charge. Notice I put the brass away from the pile I was working on. If I try to go back to the bowl, there's a variance, there's a difference. So I got to recalibrate again. So it was approximately 4 scoops. $48.9, 51.1, 51.9, 52. Now I'll show you a better way to pour the powder. If you pour it nice and slow from a little bit higher, it'll bounce around in there and you won't have the powder gumming up. It'll pretty much go in there on its own. See? So we got all our powder in there. No problem. One, two, three, four. Now a good option would be a powder dispenser, and I used to have one. In fact, I sold it, and that was probably the worst thing I've ever done, was selling that thing, because that makes it nice. They don't throw charges based on weight, they throw charges based on volume. But a lot of times you can get it dialed in to the correct weight, you know, even though it's being measured by volume. 52.2, so we're a little bit hot, and since we're on the high end, I better remove a couple. 51.9 is okay, but I want to add maybe 1 or 2 granules. And that's only because we're at the high end of the spectrum that I'm having to be so careful. Make sure you're not spilling powder out of your cases when you do this. Don't ever put your fingers into the powder bowl. But let's go back to talking about those metering and the powder measurers. There's several of them out there on the market. Lee happens to make one. They call it the Perfect Powder Measure. It works really good and it's very inexpensive. I used to have one. It throws a pretty good charge. I think you can pick those up for, I don't know, 20 bucks or something. And they work really good. RCBS makes one. I don't know, $70 or something. It does a good job. The one that I have my eyes on, though, is the Hornady. The Hornady has a promotion going on right now. If you're going to buy a press or dies or anything Hornady, they have what they call the Get Loaded promotion. And that's where, like, say I was to buy one of those powder measures, they would give me credit for 100 free bullets. If you buy like their Hornady lock and load auto progressive press, I think they give you like 500 bullets credit. A couple years ago they used to hand out 1,000 bullets. What's up with that, Hornady? Come on, let's go back to 1,000. Anyway, the cool thing about those powder measures is you can change out the metering inserts. So you can switch from, like, say I was going to load 223 and then I want to switch to 30-06 and I don't want to change my powder, but I do want to change the charge. Very easy. I just put in that other metering insert and wham, I'm over there throwing 23 grains. Now I'm throwing 52 grains, you know. That's the cool thing about those. Plus they're very, very accurate and you don't have to waste all this time. You know, and I'm not saying this is a waste of time, what I'm doing. I'm saying you could save time and you could come up with your powder charges a lot quicker. Because what a lot of people do, and what I used to even do, is I would have a trickler and I would make it throw just under what my desired charge weight was. Like say I was looking for 52 grains, I would make it throw around 51 and a half or something, and then what I would do is from there I would trickle up to whatever charge I wanted. So, and that worked pretty good for me. So we're going to put this powder back in. We're all done. So I don't try to get my fingers onto the powder or anything like that. Those 4 bullets have been charged. Now there's a very important step, and that's looking down into the necks of them and seeing if the charge is uniform. So I'm going to take this thing on hand for a second, and I'm going to look down into the mouths of the cases, and I'm just looking at the powder level to make sure that they're all uniform in the amount of powder that they have in them. If you notice one that's excessively high or excessively low, you might want to check it out and see what the deal is. But in our case, everything looks good. So I'll see you on the next step. We're going to be seating bullets. Okay, we just finished charging our loads. I looked down into the case mouths and verified that they all have powder. This leaves us with the next step of our operation, and that's uninstalling the decapping and resizing die. And then we're going to install the bullet seating die. So what I want to do is I want to take one of the cases that I'm going to seat a bullet on. I'm going to insert it into the shell holder. I'm going to take my bullet seating die. Actually, let me back this stem out. I want to throw off all these settings because I want to show you how to set this die. So I'm going to undo all the settings that I already had. I'm loosening the bullet seating stem all the way out. Now I'm going to thread my bullet seating die down into the press as I raise the ram, and I'm going to lower this bullet seating die until I feel it touch the mouth of the case. Right there. And you don't want to make it like real tight. Once I feel it touch the mouth of the case, I'm going to back it off, in other words counterclockwise, about between 1/16 and 1/8 of a turn. So my thumb is in this position, my thumb's going to end up in this position. Just that much, that's all it takes. From there, I'm going to hold the die and I'm going to lock the lock ring. And I'm not going to lock it like real crazy, I'm just going to snug it up. Again, it doesn't have to be gorilla tight, just snug. From there, I'm going to get my first bullet, and since this is a short press, I can't just stick the bullet in there. I have to kind of insert it up into the die down into the case. I'm going to raise the ram all the way up. And now nothing's happening because my bullet seating stem is backed out all the way. I'm going to turn my bullet seating stem down until I feel it touch the bullet. Now I'll lower the ram and I'm going to go 2 full turns. There's a half, there's one, there's another half, 2 full turns, and I'm going to seat the bullet. Remove the case. Our overall length that we're looking for, again, let's take a look. We're looking for 3.285 inches. That's our overall length. So I'm here. I'm going to come over, get my calipers, and I'm going to check that length. I'm going to see where I'm at. So I need 3.285. And I have a feeling we're going to be a little long right now. So I insert the bullet in. 3.44. So we're quite a bit long. So let's insert the bullet back into the die, back into the shell holder. Let's go another 2 turns. 1, which would be 4 halves. Let's do that and see what happens. Seat the bullet a little more. Now let's inspect it again for length. 3.285. The closer you get, 3.36. The closer you get to your desired overall length, the smaller the adjustments are that you make on your bullet seating stem. So we're at 3.37 basically. So let's go 1 full turn, which would be 4 halves. Or excuse me, 2 halves. And see what happens. Seat it a little more and then we'll measure. You don't want to go too big of an increment because you might lose, you might go beyond 3.22, or excuse me, 3.32. And we need 3.28. So we're getting closer. 28 is what we need, and we're at 32 right now. If you make too big of an adjustment in this step right here, you'll go beyond and you'll go too short, and you can't really undo that unless you bullet pull it. 3.299. So we're getting very close because we need 3.285. So now I'm going to do like half turn increments. And then the closer I get, I might turn them down to quarter or eighth turns. .2770. Excellent. We're just under it. In fact, I might have went just a hair deep, so I'm going to go counterclockwise like a 1/16 of a turn. And I'm going to hold that thing. I'm going to hold the bullet seating stem, and I'm going to lock this little lock ring. Not gorilla tight, just snug. Inspect the case, make sure we got powder, because sometimes you'll get working and you'll accidentally bump into it or something and you'll spill the powder without even knowing. Now I think we're at our target length here, so let's see what happens. We're looking for 3.285. 3.285. Wow, right on the money. See that one more time. 3.285. Wow, right on the money. Perfect. Okay, so that's the technique. So this bullet is perfect. So we're going to use this bullet as an example. I'm going to set it up here as an example. This one's good too, but it's not as close. We're going to use that one as an example, because what I'm going to show you now is, let's suppose you don't have the data of what the overall length is supposed to be on your bullet. I'm going to show you how you can copy a bullet. So this is just another technique. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to undo everything. I'm going to take the die out, everything. I'm going to mess everything up, and then I'm going to start over. We're going to copy this bullet as close as we can anyway. Now when you copy a bullet, sometimes it doesn't give you like exactly, but sometimes it does. I mean, it'll put you very close though. So I'm going to release the bullet seating stem all the way out. And you can see that this die is totally getting reset. Bullet seating stems all the way out. Lock rings all the way out. This is the bullet we want to match. So I'm going to put it in the press, starting over from scratch. Raise the ram, and I'm going to lower this die until I feel it touch the top of the bullet. Until I feel it touch. Once they meet, and I'm not going to tighten it real tight against it, I'm just going to let them meet nice and snug. Then I'm going to lock my lock ring. Okay. Once the lock ring is locked, I want to copy the bullet seating depth, height. So let's turn this bullet seating stem down until we feel it again touch the top of the bullet. This will get us very, very close. Our target was 3.285. Okay, I feel it touching. Lower just a little and lock. I'm locking the bullet seating stem. Take out our target bullet, set it aside. Now let's go for the one that we're trying to make a copy. Stick the bullet in, seat the bullet. Now let's inspect and see what our measurement is. We should be very close. Our objective is 3.285. 3.289, so this is fine. This is fine because if we wanted to get a little bit picky, we could insert, release the bullet seating stem, and go in a 32nd of a turn, and then lock, raise the ram, reseat, and remeasure. And this might get us exactly where we were. But we're talking thousandths of an inch. 3.286, 3.2850. See? So we copied that bullet. I mean to a T, 100%. It's exactly the same. So now that the die is set, in either case, whichever technique we chose to use to find our bullet height, our overall length, whichever technique we choose, it doesn't really matter. What matters is there's two ways of doing it that I could show you. I know a few other ways, but those are the two that I use the most. If you're worried about concentricity issues, here's a suggestion. This bullet is getting ready to seat. I'm going to go halfway up until I first feel it touch. I'm going to seat the bullet halfway, back off, turn it 180 degrees, and seat it the rest of the way. This will help battle against concentricity. .2845. Perfect. And again, I'll show you the concentricity again. Come here, bring the bullet up, run it halfway up, start seating, turn it, and the rest of the way up. Let's measure. We're looking for 3.285. 3.2845. Wow. You can't get much closer than that. That is a perfect bullet. So I have one more thing I want to recommend. And that is let me move all this stuff out of the way for a second here. When you get your bullets all finished, you have one more final thing to do, and that's your final inspection. You're going to come in here to the bullet, rub it down with a nice clean rag, and this guy, my case length gauge, I want to drop my bullet in there, and I want to see. This is going to be hard to see, I think, but this distance, this bullet should be underneath this high mark, but no lower than this low mark. You're looking for your primers to stick out, and you're looking for your case. If your bullet looked like this, I'm doing this on purpose, but say it looked like that, you would have headspace issues when you chambered this round into your rifle. But so you want them to go flush or just recessed. Now this side of the gauge checks for headspace. If you flip it over, and again this is probably going to be difficult to see, there's a high side and there's a low side. If you can see your brass inside there coming up beyond this high side, you need to trim your brass. But since we've trimmed already, we're fine. You can barely see the brass in there. So there's no need to trim. It would be up beyond this high side. It can be below this low a little bit. Like we're about, what, 1/1000th or 2/1000ths of an inch underneath there. So that's fine. So this case length gauge tells you everything. They're a very inexpensive tool to buy, and they tell you a lot about the ammunition that you make. See, so you're feeling the primer to see if the primer is seated, you know, below flush, and if you didn't trim, you're going to flip it over and check that. But I usually just check for headspace. Now, I had one bullet that I made a couple days ago that had a very minor headspace issue, and I'll show you that here in a second. It wasn't, you know, these are dropping down really good. The bullet that I made the other day, like I said, it had a very minor headspace issue. I'll share that with you now. And it wasn't even that bad. This is the bullet that I made the other day. See? Let me turn it around. It's very minute, but it does exist. Very small. This bullet's fine. It's going to be just fine, but you know, if I hadn't had the headspace gauge, I wouldn't have known. But this gives you a good visual of what a... Now, I've seen others that were like, I mean, literally like this. Those are obviously blatantly wrong. This one is so close to being good that I'll probably just shoot it through like a bolt action or something. I don't think I'll bullet pull it. But that's the case length gauge, and that's pretty much concludes my video. And I want to tell you thank you for watching, that I appreciate you checking out my video. I hope that you found some good information in there, and please feel free to subscribe to my channel. Feel free to leave a comment, and if you do so, please leave a positive, good comment. Don't be cussing and all that, or otherwise I'll just delete it.